continuing in our examination of the theme and variations, in this video I'll discuss two further aspects. The first is how the size of the theme affects the overall scope of the piece, and then second, the form of the piece itself, the way that the variations are arranged. In that first aspect, we could say that the size of the theme and the scope of the overall piece have an inverse relationship with each other, which means that as the size of the theme increases, the less we're actually able to do with it, and so the smaller the form actually becomes. This is the same as in the rondo forms. The size of the theme in the third rondo form is actually a lot smaller generally than in the first and second rondo forms, because more can be done with it. And so conversely, the more concise the theme is, the more we can do with it, and the larger and more complicated the form can be. So to illustrate that point, if you've heard the J.S. Bach Chaconna in D minor, it's just a monumental piece of music, and if you haven't heard it, I encourage you to do so. The original was for violin solo. Segovia wrote a guitar transcription, and then Bisogni wrote the piano transcription, or one of them, the most famous. And the theme is actually a fairly simple short harmonic progression that's molded throughout the piece. There's more to it than that, and we'll get into that in later in this video and in a future video. But it's not that long of a theme in itself, and so Bach is able to do more with it. So, contrasting that with, if you've heard my Hitchcock variations or Gounod variations, that's a longer theme. So the form is actually very simple. It's basically just a set of technical variations, and it's simple in structure. So we can see how the size of the theme actually has a lot to do with what we're able to do later on. So we kind of have to plan ahead. So we can approach composing a theme and variations in one of two ways. We can either have in mind the scope of the overall piece that we want to write, a large scale or smaller scale, and then compose a theme accordingly. Or if we have a theme that lends itself toward writing variations, then we can choose the form based on its size. And now for the second aspect of considering the form or the scope is the structure itself. And so we could either write single variations, meaning that we only have one theme that we just repeatedly write variations for. Again, going back to my Gounod variations or Hitchcock variations, it's the same theme in every variation. Conversely, in La Campanella, it's actually a double variations form, because you have the main theme in G sharp minor, and then the B, that's A, so B is in B major. And so on. And then there's a variation for that, and then they kind of alternate. And then you have something that the Chaconna does, which is even larger in scope, or much larger in scope actually. He has the theme, which is the harmonic progression starting in... now it might sound more familiar to you. So that's the theme, but then he also writes a subject. And the subject forms the skeleton or the framework for another, for the harmonic and sometimes even melodic basis that's also he writes variations for, and so the two alternate. We'll talk about that in more detail in another video. But so to just recap, we have the size of the theme affecting the scope of the piece, and then we have the number of themes that we're going to use to write variations for affecting the structure.